My name is Liza. I am 55 years old. And there are moments in life that carve themselves so deeply into your memory that they refuse to fade. No matter how many decades pass. This story begins, not in a hospital room, not with the cry of a newborn, but with a question that slipped from my lips almost casually, an innocent question I had asked countless times before. When is the baby due? The room fell silent. The air seemed to hold its breath. And then came the reply that would etch itself into my soul forever. He was born yesterday. I remember that pause, the way time seemed to bend and twist. How the walls around me suddenly felt closer. How my chest tightened with the weight of something I didn't yet understand. It was as if the world had shifted on its axis, dragging me into a story I hadn't prepared to be part of. That moment was not just about birth, or about death, or even about time. It was about all three converging in a single heartbeat. The words echoed in my mind, unraveling memories, stirring emotions I thought I had buried long ago. Behind those few syllables lay an entire history of waiting, of loss, of resilience, of the strange ways in which life chooses to reveal itself. Tonight, I want to take you with me back through the years, through the shadows of uncertainty and the light of revelation. This is not simply the story of a child being born. It is the story of what it means to ask a simple question and to receive an answer that changes everything. The silence after those words settled into me like a stone sinking into deep water, each ripple spreading wider and deeper than the last. He was born yesterday. That phrase clung to me, echoing in the hollow places of my chest, and I could feel the weight of its truth pressing against the years of my own life. I didn't know then how much those 4 words would change me, how much they would stitch themselves into my memory, as though written with fire. I only knew I could not look away. Something had happened, something more than a birth, and my own heart was being pulled into its orbit. In that room, time seemed to stretch and collapse all at once. I had asked a question I thought was harmless, ordinary, the kind of question people ask without a second thought. But the answer was like a key, turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. The mother's eyes told me the story her lips could not shape. They carried a heaviness, a weight of both wonder and fear, as if she was still trying to comprehend what had happened to her, still trying to hold on to the miracle and the terror in equal measure. The father stood nearby, shoulders stiff, hands restless, his entire body betraying a silent prayer. And then there was me, standing in the doorway, caught between the world I had known just moments before and this new one, raw and untamed, into which I had suddenly been thrust. The baby himself seemed impossibly small. His skin so delicate it was almost translucent, his breathing uneven but persistent, each rise and fall of his chest announcing to the universe, I am here. I found myself staring, not just because he was beautiful, but because he seemed to hold within him the fragile balance between life and death. He was not the promise of tomorrow. He was the reality of now, a reminder that life does not wait for our timetables, our plans, our expectations. It arrives as it chooses, sometimes early, sometimes late, sometimes in ways we cannot explain. I thought back to my own younger years, too, when the idea of motherhood had been more than just a fleeting thought. There had been nights when I'd pressed my hand to my stomach, imagining what it would be like to feel another heartbeat inside me. But life had taken me on a different path, one of longing and loss, of learning to build meaning in places where absence lived. I had learned to smile at other people's joy, to offer congratulations at baby showers, to hold infants and hand them back when the tears came. I had taught myself to be content, or at least to pretend to be. But here, watching this tiny child draw breath as though it was the hardest task in the world, the ache I had buried for decades came rushing back, raw and undeniable. The parents began to speak in quiet fragments. Their words half whispered, half prayers. They told me how everything had happened so suddenly, how the doctors had rushed, how the world had tilted from anticipation to emergency in the span of an hour. The child had come too early, they said, before his time, before their hearts had fully prepared to hold him. They spoke of fear of what the doctors had warned, fear of what tomorrow might bring, fear of hope itself. And yet, as they spoke, their eyes never left him. Their love was fierce, protective, like a flame burning against the wind. I listened, silent, my presence fragile but necessary. It felt wrong to speak, wrong to interrupt the sacredness of the moment. Sometimes words cannot reach where the soul already is. So I simply stayed, letting their story wash over me, letting the truth of their vulnerability sink into me. And as I sat there, I realized something profound. I was being asked, without words, to carry part of their burden. To witness, to hold space, to remember. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love is not in fixing, not in solving, but in bearing witness to another's pain and joy. Hours passed like that, in a blur of quiet voices and steady breathing. Nurses came and went, adjusting machines, checking vitals, whispering reassurances. The room felt suspended outside of time, as though the world beyond its walls had ceased to exist. And yet, every so often, I would glance at the window, where the city stretched endlessly beyond, and wonder how many others were living their own moments of crisis, of beauty, of loss, unseen and unremembered. How many questions had been asked that day, questions as simple as mine, that had opened doors into stories too heavy to carry alone. That night, when I finally stepped outside, the air was sharp. The sky stretched wide and indifferent above me. I walked slowly, each step heavy with thought. The city lights flickered like stars that had fallen too close, and I wondered how many of them had witnessed stories like the one I had just entered. I could not stop thinking about the child, about the way his tiny body had fought to breathe, about the way his parents had clung to each moment as if it might be their last. The echo of my question haunted me. When is the baby due? The answer had already changed into something larger. He is here, and he is fragile, and he may not stay. The following morning, I returned. I told myself it was to bring flowers, to offer kindness, but deep down, I knew it was because I needed to. Something inside me had been stirred awake, something I had long silenced, and I could not walk away from it. When I entered the room again, the mother looked at me with tired eyes, yet she smiled. It was a small smile, cracked and weary, but it was real. She welcomed me in, and I felt the unspoken bond tightening between us. We talked more that day. She told me about her dreams for the baby, about how she had imagined holding him in a sunlit room, introducing him to family, celebrating his first steps. None of it had gone as planned. Instead, she had been thrust into a world of medical charts, oxygen monitors, and whispered consultations with doctors who used words like uncertain and fragile more often than she could bear. Still, she clung to hope, not because it was easy, but because it was all she had. The father joined us too, speaking less but with equal weight. He told me about the moment he first held his son, how he had been terrified of breaking him, of failing him, and how he had whispered a promise into the child's ear. "I will fight for you." His voice cracked as he said it, and I could see that he meant it with every fiber of his being. As I listened, I thought again about my own life, about the promises I had never had the chance to make, the lullabies I had never sung, the tears I had never wiped from a child's cheek. And yet, in that room, I felt as though I had been given a small piece of it. Not as a mother, not as a relative, but as a witness. As someone who could carry their story into the world and ensure it was not forgotten. Days turned into weeks. I visited often, sometimes bringing food, sometimes simply bringing myself. Each time, I was met with the same mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. The same fragile hope wrapped around unbearable uncertainty. The baby grew slowly, his breaths steadier, his cries stronger. And with each small victory, the parents allowed themselves to exhale just a little more. But always, there was the shadow. The doctors spoke cautiously, reminding them not to assume too much, not to rush too quickly into celebration. It was a constant balancing act, hope against fear, joy against sorrow. And through it all, I remained, learning that sometimes life does not give us clarity, only presence. We cannot always know the ending, but we can hold each other through the middle. Looking back now, I understand that the question I asked was not an accident. It was the opening to a story I was meant to enter, even if only for a chapter. It taught me that life is not about waiting for perfect timing, for due dates circled on calendars. Life is about the moments that come unannounced, the ones that break us open and force us to feel, to connect, to carry one another. And in that room, holding the weight of both life and death in my gaze, I learned what it means to truly see. The weeks bled into one another like watercolor spreading across damp paper, edges soft, boundaries uncertain. Each time I returned to that hospital, I felt as though I was stepping not into a building, but into a world apart from the rest of existence. Outside, people hurried to work, traffic snarled, life buzzed with its usual noise. Inside, everything narrowed down to the fragile rhythm of a single infant's breathing. The machines hummed, the air was heavy with antiseptic and whispered prayers. And every face I saw carried both exhaustion and hope etched into its lines. The baby grew, but slowly. His body, so delicate at first, began to gather strength in small increments. Victories measured, not in leaps, but in the quiet persistence of survival. One day, he managed to breathe a little longer without the machine's help. Another day, his cry came sharper, more insistent. To anyone else, these might have seemed like ordinary signs, but to his parents and to me, they were triumphs. Proof that he was fighting, that he was claiming his place in the world. Yet each triumph was tempered by the constant reminder from doctors and nurses. Progress was fragile. Setbacks could come at any moment. And certainty was a luxury no one could afford. I watched the mother transform before my eyes. At first, she had been pale, her face drained by fear and exhaustion, but gradually I saw a quiet steel form within her. She learned the language of machines, the meaning of every beep, every flicker of light. She learned to read her child's tiny cues, to sense his needs before the monitors even changed. She became both warrior and guardian, balancing the trembling vulnerability of hope with the unyielding strength of a mother's love. Her eyes still carried fear, but behind it burned something fiercer, determination. The father, too, changed. His hands, once restless and uncertain, grew steady. He began to cradle the baby with a confidence that startled even him. I watched the way he leaned over the crib, whispering words his son could not understand, but could surely feel. Promises, prayers, stories of the future. He spoke of teaching him to walk, of taking him to the park, of showing him the world beyond those sterile walls. His voice would sometimes crack, betraying the fragility beneath his strength, but he always kept speaking. His son's survival became his mission, his reason to endure long nights and harder days. And what was I in all of this? At first, I had been a bystander, a woman who asked the wrong question at the right time. But as days stretched into weeks, I found myself woven into their story. Not by blood or obligation, but by something more subtle, connection. I became the one who fetched coffee when exhaustion set in, the one who sat silently when words were too heavy, the one who listened when they needed to unburden themselves. I had no role that could be defined, no title that fit neatly, yet my presence seemed to matter. And in giving to them, I found something returning to me, a sense of belonging, of being part of something larger than myself. Late one night, when the hospital halls were quiet and shadows stretched long, the mother told me something I will never forget. Her voice was barely above a whisper, her gaze fixed on her child. She said, "When I first found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. I wasn't sure I was ready. I wasn't sure I could do this. And now, looking at him, I realize I was never meant to be ready. I was meant to love him. And that's enough." Her words pierced me. They held a truth I had long avoided, that life rarely waits for readiness. It arrives, messy and unplanned, demanding love even when fear is louder. That night, I went home and lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing her words echo. I thought about all the times I had told myself I wasn't ready for responsibility, for change, for vulnerability. How many moments had I let slip through my fingers, waiting for readiness that never came? The baby's fragile existence was teaching me more than I had learned in years of cautious living. He was reminding me that life is not measured in preparedness, but in presence. As weeks turned to months, a kind of rhythm settled in. There were setbacks, moments when the monitors screamed, when doctors rushed, when breath faltered and fear clawed its way back into the room. Each time, it felt as though the ground might give way entirely. Yet, somehow, the child endured. Each crisis left him weaker for a moment, stronger in the long run. He was, in every sense, a fighter. I began to see how the experience reshaped not only his parents, but everyone around them. Nurses lingered longer at his crib, their stern professionalism softened by affection. Doctors, usually careful with words, sometimes allowed themselves small smiles of triumph when progress came. Even strangers who passed through the ward paused, drawn by the sight of this tiny life clinging so fiercely to existence. He became more than a baby. He became a symbol, a reminder of resilience in its purest form. And yet, always, there was the question that lingered in the back of everyone's mind: would he make it? No one asked it aloud, but it lived in every glance, every sigh, every hushed conversation in hallways. It was the unspoken shadow that followed each moment of joy. Hope and fear became companions, inseparable, dancing together in fragile balance. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered softly through the blinds, I found myself holding him for the first time. The parents had asked me, gently, if I wanted to. My hands trembled as they placed his tiny body into my arms. He was lighter than I expected, warm and fragile, his breathing a faint flutter against my chest. For a moment, I could not move. I could only stare at his face, at the way his eyelids flickered, at the softness of his skin. Tears welled in my eyes, not from sorrow, but from something deeper, overwhelming awe at the sheer miracle of him, in that moment. I felt as though the years of my own longing, the ache of unfulfilled dreams, had been both acknowledged and healed. I was not his mother, but I was part of his story, and that was enough. He had given me something I had thought lost forever, the chance to love a child with no condition, no expectation, simply for existing. Holding him, I whispered words I had never spoken before, words that rose unbidden from the depths of me. You are enough. Just as you are enough. From then on, my visits took on new meaning. I was no longer simply an observer. I was part of his circle of care. I read to him softly, stories he could not yet understand but perhaps could feel in the rhythm of my voice. I sang lullabies, my voice unsteady but earnest, filling the room with melodies that had lived in my memory for decades. I traced his tiny fingers with mine, marveling at the way they curled instinctively around me. Each moment was a gift, each breath a reminder that life, however fragile, was worth cherishing, but life in the hospital was never simple. For every day of progress, there were nights of fear. I remember one night in particular, when alarms blared and nurses rushed in. His breathing had faltered, his tiny chest struggling to rise. The room filled with urgency, voices sharp, movements precise. I stood frozen, heart pounding, watching as they worked. As his parents clung to each other, silent tears streaming down their faces. Minutes stretched into eternity, each second a battle between despair and hope. And then finally, his breathing steadied. The alarms quieted. Relief washed through the room like a tidal wave, leaving us all trembling, shaken, but grateful. After that night, I realized how thin the line was between life and loss. How easily it could be crossed, how quickly everything could change. It was terrifying, yes, but it also made every moment more precious. Every sigh, every stretch of his tiny limbs, every flicker of his eyelids became a miracle. The fragility of his existence did not diminish its worth, it magnified it. The parents began to speak of the future again, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. They dreamed of taking him home, of painting his room, of introducing him to family and friends. Their voices carried both longing and fear, but also a growing certainty. He belonged to them, and they would fight for him. I saw in them a strength I had rarely witnessed before. A resilience born of love that refused to surrender. And through it all, I too was changed. I found myself carrying him with me, even when I wasn't at the hospital. In the quiet of my home, I thought of him. In the noise of the city, I imagined him. He had become a part of me, not through blood or birth, but through the invisible threads of connection that tie human lives together. I had asked a question once, a simple, thoughtless question. And in its answer, I had been given a story that would alter the course of my own. The day he finally left the hospital, the sky was a soft gray, the kind that promises rain but holds back, as if the world itself was pausing to witness the moment. For months, those sterile walls, those humming machines, those careful routines had been the entire universe for his parents, for him, and in a strange way, for me too. Every day had been a negotiation with hope and fear, every breath a victory, every silence a threat. And now, at last, he was strong enough to to be carried beyond those walls. I remember the mother clutching him close, her eyes brimming with tears, her smile wide and trembling. The father carried the bag with their few belongings, moving slowly, reverently, as though each step was sacred. I followed behind, my heart pounding, my throat tight with emotion I could not name. Outside, the air was different. Fresher, freer, carrying sense of earth and city life that had been absent in the sterile confines of the ward. The baby stirred in his mother's arms, as if he could sense it too, as if he knew that this was the beginning of something larger. Cars passed, people hurried along the sidewalks, but none of them knew the magnitude of what was happening, the miracle that was unfolding in quiet anonymity. For them, it was just another day. For us, it was everything. At their home, preparations had been modest, but filled with love. A small crib had been placed near their bed, blankets folded neatly, soft toys lined along a shelf. The walls were plain, but to me, they glowed with possibility. This was not just a room, it was a sanctuary, a promise of safety, a declaration that he belonged here. In the world, not just in the liminal space of hospital corridors. When they laid him down for the first time, he sighed softly, as though relieved. As though he too understood that he had crossed into a new chapter. In the weeks that followed, I visited often. At first, there was fear. Every cough, every restless cry sent waves of panic through his parents. But gradually, as days passed without alarms, without machines, they began to breathe easier. They learned the rhythms of his needs, the cadence of his cries, the ways his small body signaled hunger, discomfort, or contentment. Parenthood, once thrust upon them in crisis, began to settle into something steady, something familiar. And with each passing day, he grew stronger, his cheeks filling out, his eyes brighter. His laughter soft, at first growing into a sound that filled the house with joy. For me, these visits became more than habit. They became lifelines. I found myself drawn not only to the child, but to the life that was unfolding around him. There were evenings when we sat together, the three of us adults, talking quietly while he slept. Conversations ranged from the practical doctor appointments, feeding schedules, to the profound, what it meant to raise a child in a world so uncertain. What it meant to carry both hope and fear in equal measure. They let me in, not just into their home, but into their journey, and in doing so, they gave me something I had not realized I had been missing: family. One night, as I held him in my arms, rocking gently while his parents rested for a brief moment, I felt a surge of something I can only describe as healing. All those years of longing, of aching for a child of my own, all those nights when silence had felt unbearable, they seemed to soften. I realized that motherhood is not confined to biology, that love does not need permission or bloodlines. In that moment, I was not a visitor, not a bystander. I was someone who loved him, who had walked through fire and fear alongside his parents, who had witnessed his fight for life, and had been forever changed by it. As months turned into a year, milestones came. His first laugh, bubbling and unexpected, sent us all into tears of joy. His first attempts at crawling filled the room with laughter and frantic attempts to baby-proof the house. Each moment was a victory, a reminder of how far he had come, of how fragile beginnings could give rise to strength. His parents glowed with pride, their exhaustion tempered by gratitude. And I, always nearby, felt as though I had been given a gift beyond measure, the chance to watch him grow. But life, I learned, never offers joy without shadow. There were nights when illness returned, when fevers spiked, when emergency rooms became familiar once more. Each time, fear reared its head, whispering of loss, threatening to undo all that had been gained. And each time, he fought back, resilient in ways that seemed impossible for someone so small. His body carried scars, reminders of battles fought, but his spirit remained unbroken. He became, to me, not just a child, but a testament to what it means to endure. Through all of this, I found myself reflecting on that first moment, on the question that had started it all. When is the baby due? I had asked it so casually, unaware that the answer would not be a date, but a revelation. Not a month on a calendar, but a story that would alter the course of my life. He was not due, he was here, and his presence had forced me to confront parts of myself I had long hidden. He had taught me that life does not wait for our readiness, that love is not bound by expectation, that family is not always defined by blood. The years passed more quickly than I could comprehend. His first steps, his first words, his first day at school, each milestone, another chapter in a story that had begun in fragility but blossomed into resilience. His laughter grew louder, his questions more insistent, his presence more vibrant. And though the shadows of his early days never fully disappeared, they became part of the tapestry of his life. Threads of struggle woven into the fabric of his strength. On his 5th birthday, as candles flickered atop a small cake, I found myself overwhelmed. He leaned forward, cheeks puffed, eyes wide with excitement, and blew them out in a single breath. The room erupted in applause and laughter, but for me, it was more than a celebration. It was a culmination, a reminder of how far he had come. How close we had come to losing him. How miraculous it was that we stood together in that room. Alive, joyful, whole. That night, as I watched him fall asleep, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of dreams, I whispered a silent prayer. Not of request, but of gratitude. For him, for his parents, for the way my life had been reshaped by their story. I realized then that we often enter each other's lives by accident. Through questions asked without thought, through moments that seem insignificant at the time. And yet, those accidents can become the turning points. The markers of who we are and who we become. Now, at 55, looking back, I see that he was not just born yesterday. He is born every day in laughter, in struggle, in resilience, in love. And I too was reborn through him. The ache of my own unfulfilled dreams did not vanish, but it transformed, becoming something softer, something richer. I learned that life gives us family in unexpected ways, that love finds its own path. That sometimes, the stories we never expected to enter become the very ones that define us. And so, when I remember the moment I asked that question, I do not feel regret. I feel awe. For in that question lay the seed of a story that would forever change me. That would teach me what it means to witness, to endure, to love. He was born yesterday, yes. But in truth, he is born again and again, in every breath, in every heartbeat, in every reminder that life is fragile, precious, and worth every moment we are given.